right, we're back.
Mm.
So
Oh,
the last, like before we lost connection, white no black people are a creation of white people. Can you finish that thought, that analysis?
hmm The paradigm tells you that black people are XYZ, as if we are a biological, physiological thing, or in its own right, or an innate behaviors or psychology comes with being quote unquote black. If you do not demarcate in your mind every time you go with any thought that starts with black people are XYZ, you're incorrect because black is a classification of the racist, and it is a reaction to the system of domination and abuse based on color. That's what to be black is. And anything that comes out from it that doesn't address that, it's incorrect. So it shouldn't be something you try to fix or change because it's something that should not exist.
Exactly. There is no exactly. There is no fixing black people, and
No.
because black people, the concept of a black person should not exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's a creation of white supremacists as a means
Mm-hmm.
to, okay, these are the people that we are going to reduce down to the servants, the entertainers, the fodder, the people who can be destroyed, thrown away, subjected to the mines, to just insane mistreatment 24/7. That's what it means to be black, and it shouldn't
Dependent.
exist. Dependent, yeah, not willing, not able to develop your potential.
Self-determined,
Yeah, yeah,
self-actualized.
yeah. Exactly. Your potential, not ever to grow into your potential. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
if not for white supremacy, I'm sure we'd be flying vehicles. I'm sure we'd be doing some profound things.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me
And can
too.
you remind us what this is the text?
Mm. The text is called mm. text is called The Psychology of Consciousness by Robert E. Ornstein, second edition. And I believe we are on page 7, maybe page 8.
Yeah,
Hang on, let me grab all my stuff I just dropped.
yeah. Cause I'm gonna play. I'm gonna put this clip first, and then I'm gonna put the other stuff after this, because
Mm-hmm.
like this is a good foundation. We should all have that racial classification, racial classification confusion, as we learned from the code, the
We should
United
be able to
Independent.
identify it.
Yep.
It's incorrect paradigms. Call them paradigms because that's what the racists call it. And they call successful paradigms that allow people to easily assume things about reality that keep that social economic reality going. So we should call them incorrect identifiers, or the result of racist tactics. The result of racial classification confusion is non-white people thinking in terms of racism being normal, or the ideal of a race being acceptable, when the only race in functional reality is proven to exist in the world is the white race. And we know their functional reality to practice white supremacy racism. And they are monolith in that. They are all the same in that. That is the declaration given by the United Independent Compensatory Code, to suspect that all white people who are able to practice racism are more than likely white supremacist racist, and they will practice racism. If you understand that the dynamic of them actually being members of a group that all the others have been demarked by based on their relationship to, they'll never agree with that. that what makes us a race, or anybody a race, is how we've been subject to the racist. I'm going to go back to the text. The text says, back on page 7. Nope, we're going to go actually to page 6. Page 6 we ended talking about the limitations of these early so-called practitioners of psychology, or what was described by Gustav Fechner as psychophysics. Hang on, another jet is flying over. An observer in the act of introspection was forbidden to report seeing a book, for example. He or she was only allowed to report, say, a brown object of a certain size and shape. Meaning that to correctly describe things for the early definers of what is now considered psychology, they had a problem with the accurate description of things because it would affect the mind of the person who is doing the observing. And it would ultimately affect their report on what they observed. So we see early in the history of what's called white psychology, it should be called white psychology, they have a problem with correctly identifying things as they are. They have a very big problem with that. So the next part goes into, here we go from the text, page 6, the psychology of consciousness. Identifying things correctly. So I'll go back to the heading in that page 6. Psychology began as the science of consciousness and developed as a synthesis of natural philosophy and 19th century science. One of its earliest practitioners, Gustav Fechner, invented the method of psychophysics in an attempt to correlate mental and physical events. Now, he's trying to give a description of mental and physical events and how people are affected by them, trying to give a reasonable reference point. Research on consciousness proceeded in the 19th century, spearheaded by a group at Cornell University under E.B. Titchener. This group sought evidence on consciousness through, quote, introspection, end quote. So a person basically reading their own thoughts and reporting them to another group, and to see how much correlation there was between these attempts at, quote, introspection, end quote. This group at Cornell University, headed by E.B. Titchener, their research strategy was to have the observers attempt to analyze the contents of personal consciousness and to compare their analysis with that of others. But the observers did not often agree. Individual differences and difficulties with verbal reporting of experience were not taken into account. Individual differences and difficulties with verbal reporting of experience. Sounds like everybody didn't want to identify their reality with the same words. That would, I guess, concede certain intentionalities. They didn't want to be judged by one another. To remedy this lack of common ground. See what gets in the way when you're attempting to do research about consciousness? Lack of common ground. Even when people were talking about their internal introspect-given interpretations of themselves. To remedy this lack of common ground, the introspectionists found it necessary to limit their field of inquiry. So they limited what they were questioning, limiting the definitions or the describers. so that they could have a more streamlined unilateral interpretation. Going down to the next chapter or next paragraph. This and other limitations of the early mentalist approach soon led to a sterility in psychology. Controversies of only academic import, in the worst sense of the term, arose. Due to these limitations on inquiry, one controversy, for instance, dealt with whether or not thoughts occur without images. Psychologists drifted further and further away from their original concerns until soon their questions were of interest only to them. And it was evident that the mentalist paradigm was more of a restriction than an aid. Remember that. They realized that the mentalist paradigm is a restriction more than an aid to understanding consciousness. Having these easily definable or describable ways of relating to reality is not the best way of coming to a conclusive understanding of who we are and how to deal with this reality. Next chapter, or next paragraph. John Watson opened the gates once again with the suggestion that psychology could study action, which was, after all, publicly verifiable and testable by objective, impartial methods. This paradigm change allowed psychologists to study questions relevant to a wide range of mental and personal phenomena. Described by who? That's my next input. They began to agree that they were all going to just study the actions of a person, as if they don't come from a base of paradigms in and of itself. If they're the observers, they must have a collection of paradigms to look at common behavior and say, oh, that's what this is. That's what that is. This paradigm change allowed psychologists to study questions relevant to a wide range of mental and personal phenomena. And again, for who? For whites, I suppose, white supremacists. For instance, Watson could include such phenomenon as personality in his textbook, while Titchener could not. This movement, called behaviorism, soon swept academic psychology. It was, quote, objective, end quote, and, quote, scientific, end quote, and encouraged the study of major problems that had been left out of the introspective paradigm. Behaviorism stimulated an unusual amount of productive research, especially in the areas of learning and the motivation of behavior. I think we all understand that the ideas of the lab rat experiments or the Pavlovian dog experiments. They're going to determine what behavior means without first analyzing and determining what they are first, or the position they're in. But a problem arose that was similar to that of the mentalist approach. The scope of inquiry soon became unduly narrowed to processes that were amenable to ready solution by behavioristic methods. Psychologists began to ignore and even to deny the existence of phenomenon that did not fit into the dominant scheme. Consciousness itself was ignored in research for many years. Some even denied that it existed. And they have an asterisk by that, and I'll read the asterisk. It was sometimes jokingly said of John Watson that he thought no one conscious except himself.
Yeah.
And sounds like some racist
That's very
conceptualization.
Very egocentric.
Remember, during the development of this too, all of these people considered black people that were classified as black by them did not have the mental capacity for psychiatric evaluation or psychological understanding. They were just labeled. Oh, their behavior is due to this. Anything that was contrary to them cooperating with the system of white supremacy racism was considered to be abnormal or unacceptable behavior. Back to the text, there was an almost fatal confusion of, quote, behaviorism as a useful tool with, quote, behaviorism as the total extent of knowledge, quote, objective, end quote, factual knowledge was emphasized to the exclusion of any question not subject to a verbal logical answer. The, quote, reductio ad absurdum of this position was that of logical positivism, which maintained that any question not amenable to a perfectly logical answer should not even be asked. We still operate under this so-called logical positivism under the system of white supremacy racism. There's an assumption, massive assumptions, that all of the things we can correctly describe are already answered, and all the things that we have a hard time coming to a consensus about describing, don't worry about it. We want to talk about the effects of racism, but not about getting rid of the root of racism, which is people doing things. So they don't start with the question of dealing with racism about what to do about white people who practice racism. They just want to try to mitigate the obvious outcomes of the practice of racism without acknowledging that somebody's doing something. Here's a good example. Here's a good example of this logical positivism. You hear of racial statistics in healthcare, and then people are immediately trying to come up with ways to get rid of these, what are called racialized statistics. What do they call them? Disparations? Racial disparities. And nobody first says, wait a minute, if there is no biological nor genetic marker for race, how can you have medical issues related to race? You must have racists doing things instead of practicing medicine. They're practicing racism. And the effect is non-white people die or are harmed by racists. That's what a racial disparity is in medicine. It is evidence that racism is being practiced, domination and abuse of people based on color. Instead, we're supposed to look at it as, let's come up with ways we can ask for a grant and get some money to do some research to stop this from happening. What? Let's write a book about it to keep this from happening. Nothing about the people who do it. So they don't even ask because they want us to assume, with not even asking the question what to do about the racist. The paradigm in your mind is that there's nothing you can do about racism. Right? If you won't even come to the conclusion of asking the question because you've already believed the lie that there's nothing you can do about the problem, you can't begin to develop correct paradigms to address the problem. Still following me?
Yep.
Am I making plain? Okay. Page 7 again. At about the same time, many disaffected psychologists found faith in a system called psychoanalysis, developed by Sigmund Freud in Vienna. Same man who could not see the Nazi occupation and had to be rescued against his own so-called group of people. Back to the text. Freud's work became a rallying point for many who were interested in, quote, Freud's work became a rallying point for many who were interested in, quote, understanding, end quote, man. And as did behaviorism, it stimulated inquiry into new areas, such as the early determinants of behavior and the interpretation of dreams. As far as I know, Sigmund Freud never wrote with a correct understanding of the determinant of behavior created by racism, white supremacy. He never studied the impact upon the sub or extra consciousness that comes in dreams due to the impact of racism. So he started off from another incorrect paradigm that white supremacy racism isn't the problem, and the people who need psychoanalysis aren't non-white people. Back to the text. But since this movement was dominated by a single authoritarian personality and its followers exhibited an almost religious zeal, the disadvantages of psychoanalysis were quickly in evidence. Consciousness became identified with what could be verbalized. Religious experience was reduced to neurosis, and the motivation for almost all behavior was analyzed to another reductio ad absurdum, the sexual etiology of action, or the idea that all behavior came out of these sexual drives per gender. Reductio ad absurdum. They reduced our arguments down to this narrow base. Much later, in the 1950s and early 1960s, there was an attempt to correct the distortions of both behaviorism and psychoanalysis. This approach, known as humanistic psychology, focused on, quote, growth, end quote, interpersonal processes and new therapies. Today, what is it called? Healing, trauma, trauma work, shadow work, all these things that still haven't gotten to the root of the problem. The early promise of this approach was emphasized by Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, was never realized in the mainstream of psychology as it is today. I'm saying that. Back to the text. Humanistic psychology became, unfortunately, a divisive force, for its practitioners often tended to degrade the usefulness of science and hence perform little research to support their ideals. As today, you can go through 1,000 YouTube and Facebook posts about psychology and sociology, where people are just spouting things that, where did you get that idea from? We're not even allowed to question these little 2-minute excerpts or 60-second excerpts of this is what it is, and this is what psychiatry and psychology, and this is what we don't even question. Back to the text. A new dichotomy appeared, one that was less useful than most. In effect, psychologists were asked whether they were humanistic or, quote, scientific. Psychologists failed to recognize that their discipline is, by definition, a scientific study of human concerns and needs embrace both positions. The influence, then, of the humanist has not been as great as it might, had they contributed more to science. The history of psychology parallels the workings of ordinary consciousness. We stabilize around a set of concepts about cards, friends, the speed one can run, and hold them dear until we are overwhelmed by new evidence. Then our conceptions change once more to include new possibilities. The red ace of spades, for instance. Similarly, scientific knowledge progresses by a complementary functioning of paradigm buildup and paradigm change. A successful paradigm serves to create a stable, conservative knowledge within the scientific community until the restrictions of the paradigm become too great and it proves to limit research unduly. That sounds like what we're experiencing now, right? We're getting a buildup of certain concepts, as we did for a while about racism before this Black Lives Matter thing. They were telling us that racism was these few incidences of people who are identified as law enforcement mistreating people uh, classified as not white. Since then, through an explosion of information, we found that in every area of life, the racists are abusive and dominant. So now the paradigm is changing because of the false paradigm buildup of everything was in law enforcement. Remember 10 years ago, you couldn't talk about racism unless you were talking about the police, right?
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't talk about racism in healthcare. Who was talking about that? Not in the general populace, right? Definitely not on the news. Now there's been New York Times bestsellers, Nobel Peace Prize nominees that have revealed racism in real estate, in so-called politics, in religion. Back to the text. Science as a mode of knowledge involves a limitation on inquiry. The essence of a good experiment is successful exclusion. One factor may be manipulated while a very few other processes are measured. If, for example, we wish to study the response of brain cells to visual stimuli, we would be considered slightly loony if we also monitored the blood flow to the feet, the temperature in the room, the phase of the moon, or the current growth rate of mushrooms in Malaya, or any one of the millions of other available possibilities. But until recently, in academic psychology, the limitations of the successful behavioristic paradigm outweighed the advances. For example, psychologists once tended to ignore some evidence from sources as diverse as yoga and animal experiments that man is capable of a high degree of self-mastery in his internal physiology. Further, we have not incorporated evidence that the linear, verbal, intellectual mode of knowing is not the only mode available to man. The belief that all human knowledge is exclusively rational is incomplete. Even scientific inquiry, the most rational and logical of our pursuits, could not proceed without the presence of another type of knowledge. As an example, two scientific researchers may meet and discuss their ideas. Perhaps an experiment will emerge to be written up in a journal and still later in a textbook. These writings are generally as orderly and well-reasoned as a scientist can make them. The entire process, however, is not exclusively linear and rational. Scientific investigators often act on personal knowledge, biases, hunches, and intuition. I'd add, they often operate based on a vague position of observation. Scientific investigators don't reveal that their pursuits came about through attempts at justifying the effect of white supremacy racism or excusing the reality of white supremacy racism.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the text. It is the genius of scientific method that it translates the original, perhaps irrational ideal into the rational mode and makes it explicit so that other investigators can follow it. The rational verbal mode is primarily a method of analysis, testing, and communication. Experimental reports are made as explicit and logical as possible. That's not true. So that any qualified reader can repeat the procedure. But this method of communication should not be misunderstood as implying that any given experiment was conceived in a linear rational manner. We leave the scruffy aspects of our thought, the hunches, the insights, out of public scientific writing. What I believe he's saying is they leave the perception and perspective of overt white supremacy out of their reasonings for doing the research. And yet, without these wonderings, these quote, nighttime, end quote, questions, many of us probably would not work in science at all. They don't reveal their true intentions when they do their research because they hide those things from themselves as paradigms they use to justify white supremacy racism. That's how I interpret everything he just said. And because they cannot explicitly state that they wish to justify white supremacy racism, their projection that this is scientific research is assumed. And that limits your understanding and application of their research as well. Back to the text. A researcher may spend time thinking, quote, what is the most important experiment to do, end quote, or, quote, how does this damn thing work, end quote. And after much more of such scratching about, may try to perform an experiment that will aid his or her understanding. But the reliance on verbal rationality has caused many to feel that this method is the only way in which knowledge is gained, a conception that writers of textbooks often reinforce. How many times do the racists tell us they need to do research to see if racism is being practiced in the area of life? How many times don't they do that often? More research needs to be done. Really? More research needs to be done.
Yeah, everything's data and statistics, and they love using their
And if you go
curated data to justify the system. It's just refinement. They've been doing it since, like for a long time after learning from this book. They've just gotten refined and they've used the technology to help them.
The scope of psychology, as it has been defined in text, in the teaching of psychology, and in the bulk of research reports, has often been unduly limited to one special case of human abilities, one special method of study, one special manner in which consciousness can operate. Just as John Watson found it necessary to alter the paradigm of the introspectionist in order to open up inquiry, so we are faced with a similar situation today. A need to return to a psychology whose scope was well stated by William James. Quote, our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness, as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness. Whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. So what they're saying is that this ideal of consciousness only being what you can rationalize is foolish to think that that's the only form of consciousness you have. This man says that that's just one form of consciousness when you have many others separated from this type of consciousness only by something as thin as a film. There are potential forms of consciousness that are entirely different than the rational consciousness, like the consciousness of fear. Fear can be rational and irrational, right? Fear can be constructive and non-constructive. But when fear is researched, they tell you there's only one type of fear, right? An aversion to something non-constructive. When fear sometimes can be the best response to a phenomenon among people. That fear may cause you to proactively think of ways to mitigate and destroy that fear, eradicate it, and replace it with something else. Another type of consciousness will say to ignore that fear and allow yourself to be dominated by a different consciousness of determination or fearlessness. That's me talking. You dig?
Mm-hmm.
Back to the text. Page 9. The scope of psychology, as it has been defined in text, in the teaching of psychology and the bulk of research reports, has often been unduly limited. Oh, I read that part. To one special type. In performing scientific research, we are often unaware of the full effect of our tools, be they physical instruments or doctrines such as behaviorism. We often imagine that tools like sensory organs serve exclusively to extend awareness, but in fact, we are wrong. Both serve to limit as well as to extend. Abraham Maslow, commenting on the effect that strict behaviorism has had on psychology, wrote, "If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything as if it were a nail." How many times have we tried to, and we've listened to ourselves and others, describe the problems between black people as relating only to the mommy, daddy, or parent um, dependent relationship? And you go around in circles. How can you blame the parents if you have to exclude the social economic system the parents were in? If you blame the parents, you have to assume that they have full responsibility for themselves and their self-development before they had children. And because of that, somehow we assume that any problems the children have has to come directly from the parents. Right? That's what Freudianism says. That's what racist psychology usually says. Everything is about parents and sex. The need to have sex, the want to have sex, the aversion to sex, the preoccupation with sex. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep. And even that right there should give us a lot of insight into like the kind of minds that have taken over the planet. Just any serious understanding of what Freud was preaching.
Back to the book. A corrective needs to be applied, one that can open up the scope of psychological inquiry to the relevant questions once again. Even if all the basic questions cannot be fully answered at the moment by available methods, the overall perspective of the field should not be lost. Part of the needed change involves the explicit recognition that all too often the method of psychology has itself become the goal. This confusion has led in the past 70 years to a, quote, radical underestimation, end quote, of the possibilities, to use Jacob Needleman's phrase. I think this was good foresight into what would be today. How they've limited us, the tools we use to understand the world and ourselves. They've limited to this behaviorism, which is basically looking at the individuals as if their behavior comes from them and the people they come from. And then this idea of humanism, that everybody has the same evil, wicked desires, and we all kind of have this same psychological profile. I remember a racist telling me once, "Oh, if racism didn't exist, people would be against each other for shoe size." And I thought about that, and I had heard that from racists before, but that makes no damn sense whatsoever. People have always had different sized feet. When you're born, your feet ain't the size of your parents. So people didn't get dominated and abused because they had small feet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but this race is new. I was taught to not think of human history as evolving out of non-white people, but only think of the limited understanding of human history with white people in Europe. If you just look at what white people have done, you would be dumb enough to think because all the shit they've murdered, killed, and raped for has never been reasonable. It's been reasoned, but it's never been reasonable. So you would, if you just only base you can conceptualize natural human behavior as white experience, you would probably say, yeah, you know, if it wasn't racism, it'd be shoe size or ear size. But it's absolutely ridiculous to think that when you know of world history. That don't even make no fucking sense.
Yeah, and what they're really getting at by saying it will still be some like incorrectness happening, they're really revealing their silly, their like need for conflict and control,
Yeah,
power. That's what they're really getting at.
Yeah, that we got to abuse somebody for something.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to. We have to rape for something. Come on now. You got to kill for some reason, unjustly. Back to the text. Contemporary psychology. You're about to say something?
Yeah, looks like final exit.
Time to exit. Oh, I'm sitting outside the
No,
library now.
no. Final
I'm in
exit.
there.
No, final passage.
Okay, yeah, this will be the final one for today on today's 10. Contemporary psychology has just recently progressed beyond the limited view exemplified by our rug seller. Remember the rug seller who didn't know
Yep.
of a number greater than 100, so he was limited to how much profit or benefit he could sell off the rug for.
Mm-hmm.
A new and extended conception of human knowledge and abilities is beginning to emerge. One that includes many capabilities beyond the, quote, normal, end quote, limits. There are many recent developments that have begun to extend the scope of psychology. Psychologists are people of their culture, and our particular culture is in the midst of profound change. Now, if you ask them, what is our culture and what is their culture changed from what to what? Now, he won't say psychologists are people from the culture of white supremacy, racism, domination, and abuse based on color. And our particular culture is in the midst of profound change. He definitely wasn't thinking about change in the sense of leaving white supremacy racism as a way of thought, speech, and action to change into something that is not, or replacement. Didn't say exchange, he just said change. Or dry devil to wet devil if you get in the water. Finishing this paragraph out, there exists a, quote, counter-cultural, quote, community opposed to science, exhibiting a tremendous distaste for rational thought and its products.
Wow. Perfect final passage. Keep going.
Logic, machines, computers, and technology. And although science ought not to abandon summarily the tools that have been so brilliantly developed in the past century, this radical distaste does result from a certain excess within the scientific community and within modern psychology as well. Mainstream psychology, white supremacist psychology, has not been sufficiently concerned with consciousness, particularly the irrational aspects. What a lie. Some aspect of the complementary mode of knowledge, which is non-linear, non-straight line, and personal in nature, could be incorporated into a more complete psychology, both on a personal and a scientific level. I'll stop there. But that is a lie. Mainstream psychology has not been sufficiently concerned with consciousness. I think they've been arrogant. They haven't been adequately adapting to the counterculture consciousness of counter racism. Because for hundreds of years, they understood how to determine at a very base level how to build the consciousness of their victims, how to make their children comply. Hello, hello. You understand?
Yep.
So, that's false for him to say that. That's false for him to say that all of this development and what they call the 19th century new psychology has been about refining the system of white supremacy racism, making it harder and harder to identify correctly so as to mitigate and replace the system of white supremacy racism with justice. That has been their utmost concern, the denial of, the hiding of this horrible, tragic arrangement, and calling it anything but a tragic arrangement.
Precisely. And I also think I think white people have a enough understanding of consciousness to enjoy to see the consciousness of their victims just totally like just eviscerated, and they don't have they and the system of white supremacy provides white people with the benefit of like being able to be whoever they want to be. And if they want to go around pretending to be an idiot, pretending to be a clown, they'll get rewarded for that. And if they convince a lot of white children to also if they convince a lot of white children to also behave like idiots, and have a low level of consciousness, it's still going to benefit the system the most. And non-white people are still going to suffer the most from this reality. So, yeah, consciousness.
Right now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Right now, I believe what they're trying to do is create more self-deception and more self-delusion for the racists, because many of them have been going off of the refined code out of frustration with their growing conscious awareness of what racism is and how it works. They're going off code and reporting on each other, like racial focal pointing. All the books we've been reading in the cows are usually about racists who are trying to tell on other racists, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't want to tell you about how they practice, And the main way they practice is look over here. Look over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if we really be honest, it's something that we had already begun to assume. And now they're just breaking the canopy because they went on to higher heights. Most of the racists in that quote unquote area of life have refined and went on to higher heights of practicing racism. When they revealed the Ponzi scheme, right?
Right. Keep going.
Right after that, a whole bunch of black people started getting caught up in real estate, Ponzi scheme-ish fraud. It went through the roof when they started revealing all of these racist tactics that they've been using against each other and against other non thing. Many victims did was try to copy those methods. Great example. What we know about all this concepts for non-white people as far as citizenship and legal rights to a certain XYZ. Have a good day. Have a good day. Have a good day. But all these concepts about citizenship and ideas of if you go to court, you can prove you have a right to this and to that. But you see that as our participation in their so-called legal system went up, more misfortune happened to non-white people engaged in these activities. So I think their goal right now, the refined racists are helping the overt racists appear to be something they're not, which is stupid or dumb, which they are not, because they want a response that's parochial. If you think every racist is as dumb and overt as the certain people in his quote unquote administration, then how the hell did we get this far? You have to act as if we're not already dominated by the smartest, most brilliantly evil people on the planet. For you to assume that racism just came about with this new president. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think the only reason they're behaving this way is because it's entertaining. They know that they're fooling the masses of their victims into again thinking, oh, white people are just dumb and ignorant. Are you are you crazy? How the hell do they run the world? Even as we heard yesterday, that white dude say, back in the day where white people dominated everything when they were back in the day, they were doing blackface. As if blackface isn't still present right now. Now the victims are practicing blackface. You'll have a black person speaking totally, supposedly intelligent about a subject. Then they go, oh, hold up, wait a minute, y'all. Or do some other black fucking stupid phrase or stupid behavior for a moment to kind of jiggle their mind off of too much seriousness. And everybody in the room be like, yeah, yeah. Like you got your black points. Thanks for reminding us what black is.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I've been with black females who do that shit. And every time I'm like, why do you do that? Why do you go to all of a sudden to this behavior and call that black? You know? Why do you go to foolishness and call that? That's I guess that's you being a sister. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to hear me? Because I had the wind blowing.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Looking at that beautiful view of the airport and the ocean.
Yeah, this was a great little study. You said this was a consciousness of conscious. Is the name of this book? Before you leave.
Oh man, it's in my damn book, in my backpack. The Study of Consciousness. The Study of Consciousness, second edition. Do you have Amos Wilson's Falsification of African Consciousness?
I do have that book. Right over
That book right there should be read hand in hand with this book. Or the understanding of that book should be used to understand this book.
Who? The Study of Consciousness by who?
No, the falsification.
No, I know that book. The book
consciousness.
we just went over today. What's the name? Who wrote this book? Robert what?
It's in my damn bag. I can't. Let me stop and get it out. Hang on. I'm walking down a hill. I'm going to get on concrete in about 2 minutes. Oh, that's an ant hill from hell. You never got bit up by the ants here, have you?
Nope.
Boy, these ants feel like fire, boy. All you got to do is stop about 10 seconds on a mound or by a mound. And they on your shoe and your ankle, up your legs.
You were saying?
This book is so good because it clears up a lot of the vague understanding they gave us about the mind or the brain's functioning and the mind's therefore reacting to the world and the environment and the so-called history of peoplekind. One of the things that this guy affirms also, which Amos Wilson, I'm sure he took some notes from this book, there is no such thing as common sense or a normal mentality. No such thing. Or there is no consciousness that is complete, settled, unchanging, unalterable, and no individual can experience any concept of altered consciousness as an individual. You don't have a consciousness that is just made up of whatever it is. selectively chosen, and it's automated by the consciousnesses that are in the world before you get here. So even in an altered state, even on mushrooms, we're only choosing things from already what we have available in our consciousness. So you're not going to reach into a realm that you know nothing of through mushrooms or through weed or through anything, any psychedelic or LSD or heroin or opium or even dreams. Dreams come from what we've collected from our shared experience with other consciousnesses. That's why no one should, as an individual, should be able to impose their consciousness onto you. Number one, they can't. It's impossible to actually do it. But number two, it's fallacy to think that you should be demanded to participate in the consciousness of another person because of their individual want of that consciousness. I'm a woman, call me a woman. I'm not why should I be demanded to participate in that bullshit with you when I know in my consciousness it's impossible for you to be a fucking woman and a man standing right in front of me? Because that's impossible. It's impossible for me to know you're a fucking man and to really think you're a woman. I can't even go to that. Like, the mind cannot even conceive of that. It's a total bullshit practice just to distort thinking and communication. That's really the key. You distort thinking by distorting communication. You confuse thinking by confusing communication. And our consciousness is built on a continuous fluctuating alteration that comes with the present mode of life. But it is also constantly being reinforced by a deliberate remembering of what we call history or the past. But our consciousness is doing both. It's making alterations and adaptations and applications to the now based on what it knows of what was and what is, whether we know it or not, or whether we at the moment are grasping it or not. We know that when we walk in our apartment and the lights are out, we've had experience of knocking into shit, so we get cautious even though our physical eyes aren't picking up on those things. We are conscientiously aware due to a remembering. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why you can't, even if you want to, treat a male just because he tells you to so like a woman. You can't. You don't have any historical memory on being able to do that, and nobody in human history has been able to do that. To change the physiology of a person from one gender, so-called, to another gender. Impossible. We didn't even get to decide on the shit when it happened. So how are we going to somehow have a mind-altering state to where we can really consider that? You know?
Precisely.
Yeah. I was thinking about it the other night when I was thinking about how these idiots will try to say there is actually something called a transvestite, and they're not acutely insane because they're with a transvestite. It's not anti-sexual because oh boy, these races have really fucked the world up. They really fucked up reality. And they're not even trying to improve on that which is. They're just trying to confuse more so they can more easily dominate. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But another thing this book reveals, there is no such thing as a biological clock. And if you know how Yoruga was talking about, because I believe she may have actually gotten notes from this book also. He talked about how time, this linear concept of time, is really something that's been imposed. He says by Western thought, but we know Western is code for white supremacist thought. We know traditional esoteric means non-white people. Non-white people's modes of thinking and attending to the world. So he revealed and explained clearly there is no such thing as a biological clock. time is something that has been implanted and imposed upon the mind of man. Time doesn't exist in the linear fashion that we've been taught. There's not supposed to be a so-called progression, but if we describe it the way the racists really are presenting it, there's not supposed to be an acquisition of treats and trinkets on the so-called time of our existence to prove that we've somehow accomplished or really are experiencing some advance in our life experience. Because that's what they tell us, right? At certain ages or certain times, you're supposed to have, experience, get, do, acquire. And it's all on this ladder, this progressive ladder. If it's not going up, it's going further into the future. And that's how we're supposed to perceive the concept of ourselves and what we're doing in the world. And plan our future projection and application to the world based on these concepts of linear, progressive, so-called time. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Shit doesn't make sense. And if you just break it up into some of the experiences people had, you'll see how it's stupid. When 10-year-olds are told they have terminal cancer. So they should feel like if they took the world concept like that, they feel like they've been so horribly mistreated and cheated, they shouldn't even have been allowed to exist. But we know that when you go into the hospitals with these kids, that's not what they have in mind. They don't even want people around them talking that shit. Oh, you're not gonna have your high school graduate. Oh, you're not gonna graduate. Oh, you're not gonna have your first boyfriend. Oh, you're not gonna get, But if we don't have that condition, the racists want us to lament all these fucking things linearly that we were supposed to experience or have or acquire. It's all bullshit. We're falling through fucking space on a piece of dirt, being drawn by a bright-ass piece of light. And it's on purpose. The way the race, it would make you feel unfulfilled because their version is incomplete. They won't even deal with what is. What they've done. And correct that. Instead, we're supposed to be on this non-ceasing search for enlightenment and an understanding of something out there beyond ourselves. You know, I like also how he broke down that our consciousness is supposed to be intuitive and intellectual, not one without the other. I like how he broke down how, because of the way the racists have kind of like invaded all of us, stopped us where we were in our development, and either eradicated it or cataloged it and assimilated it. Our the way they have given us a worldview is that primitive is intuitive and intellectual is this pretty much just accepting of whatever the whites say is academic, whatever trend they're on now, and saying, oh, this is true. You've heard, here's a good example. You've heard how many black people started about 10, 12 years ago, maybe more. Oh, we only use this much of our brain or some shit like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. You use your whole fucking brain. And so much so, there's no one time you're using this part of your brain because the EEG says so. The EEG is electroencephalopathic graphing. That is just electrodes attached to your skull and scalp that are able to read electronic sensors during different times or during different activities. It's never the same. It's never... When you go shit, your brain may light up 20 different ways for the same damn thing. And that's what the research said from the beginning. You let the racists come in and they put up a whole new goddamn thing of telling people that they are their brain's function without bringing into what is your mind doing? Your brain is a biological thing. Your mind is beyond the biology, yet attached to it intimately. That we know of, right?
Yeah, the way we've been taught to
Objectify.
exactly.
Objectify everything.
Yes,
Objectify everything.
it really allows. It really opens the mind up to be like warped and distorted and immensely confused and sabotaged, like we see happening 24/7 on this planet.
24, 24, 24, 24.
I shouldn't even say on this planet 24/7 in this system, like dominated by racist man, racist woman, white people.
Yeah, it's best to bring it down to who they are. I'm noticing too more experiences in my life. It's nothing coincidental, especially when you come across people who we have to remember too to question when somebody's like talking to us. What do they want? What does this person really want? I'm noticing I've been talking to a lot of non-white people who, more than anything, looking for an excuse to not participate as much as they're able in justice. That we look for a way to go, I don't have nothing to do with nothing. So even like when we talk, we only talk in ways that are refracting off of what others say to keep pushing that shit on down the line. We never talk to receive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We never talk to try to hear what do I need to say to this person for true communication to take place. We start off, unfortunately, unbeknownst to most of us, with a lying concept in our mind that you can actually communicate after falsehood is present. You can't. There's no such thing. No communication. Once falsehood, lies, deception is present, incorrect info is over. It's already over before it began. So the premise that most of us reach out to communicate is already fucked up, is already blown out the water. That's the hardest thing dealing with most non-white people, knowing that unless I be false, I can't even talk to this. I can't even say words around this person. That's every fucking where you go. You can't even talk to another. You can't even let words come out that could be understood as words without already agreeing that I gotta hold back. I can't really tell them. I can't share my thoughts. I can't. So communication truly is just like that book said before that I was reading a while ago. Communication is really about what people don't want to tell you or don't want to reveal. So they communicate based on that, what they don't want to reveal, what they don't want you to know. And we're so lost, we don't even know that when we do it, we're doing it to harm the other person. To make them think something that is true that is not true. To go along, to get along. Simple. Oh, how you doing, man? You lying by even saying that because you really don't want this person to tell you how they're doing. Because you don't want the responsibility you think that comes with knowing to help. You don't want to hear a cry for help. You don't want to express a cry for help because your little fucking ego says, don't let people know that you're unsure about this life. Don't tell them that you don't know nothing about really if you're a man or not. Don't tell them you're terrified, but you exist with no purpose. Don't tell them that you're a molester, rapist, thief, a con artist, a pedophile. fucking crazy.
Absolutely insane.
But this guy even shows. You know how many times he mentions codification? Even a book called, oh my God, wait till you, the index of this fucking book, oh my God, I'm gonna be reading for years if I live. Where is it at? There it is. Oh, wait, where is it? Where is it? Oh my God. Let me take this girl this phone. She probably was on it. Damn. Okay. Shit. It's called, the name is, it blow you away, just the name alone, but it's, it's coming. Biological feedback and self-control, science and the human understanding, written by J. Robert Oppenheimer in 1966. I want that book. Right here. A book by the name of a woman by the name of, by a white woman, I'm sure, by the name of Dorothy Lee. Codification of reality.
Damn.
Lineal and non-lineal, right? It was written in the Psychosomatic Medicine magazine in 1950. 1950. Codification of reality. Oh, here's another good one too. I've been studying this in my own life. An investigation of the influences of success and failure on the estimation of time. And that was written in the Journal of General Psychology in 1939, volume 21, pages 51 to 62. Write this down if you could so we could read up on it later. And this is a paper by J.J. Harton, Harton, an investigation of the influence of success and failure on the estimation of time. And the other one is Dorothy Lee, Codification of Reality, Lineal and Non-Lineal, in Psychosomatic Medicine, Volume 12, number 2, second edition, or second printing. And there's another one, series of novels written about time. Called Clea. I can't find right now where the damn book is. I can't think of who wrote it. Electroencephalography, EEG readings. Oh, here's another one. Licit and Illicit Drugs by Edward M. Breacher. He's got some good stuff in that one. And another one is called The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James.